Okay, wonderful. Well, I would like to welcome our hostess for this webinar, Dianna Vagianos Armentrout. I always hope I pronounce your name correctly, Dianna. So let me tell you a little bit about Dianna. Dianna is a published writer, a teacher, a workshop facilitator, a poetry therapist, and a grief and intuitive consultant. She is also the author of the beautiful book, Walking the Labyrinth of My Heart, which she will tell us more about today. And I also just want to say that I'm honored to call her my friend and my colleague. And we're so grateful to have her as an affiliate member of the Colorado End of Life Collaborative. And so, Dianna, thank you for hostessing today's webinar, and I will let you take it away.
Well, thank you for having me, Cindy. This is such an important topic, and grief that often gets left out. Here's my book, Walking the Labyrinth of My Heart, A Journey of Pregnancy, Grief, and Newborn Death, which I wrote to support families going through losses, these very early losses. And I share my story. There's some very raw journal entries that I wrote when I found out my daughter, Mary Rose, would die soon after birth, if I was lucky to meet her alive. I write about the 2 miscarriages I had after. I have blog posts, and I asked what people wanted to know, and so the discussion goes from, abortion and choosing what you're going to do, which is a very personal decision, choosing whether or not to put a baby on life support when they have life-limiting diagnoses. We've got what I'd like to share today, some emails from a mentor who supported me through my pregnancy, Cubby, and more, and poems, because, I can't do a book without poetry. So it has lots of different things in there, including a chapter on whether or not to send out birth announcements for a baby who has died. And I think these are such specific issues, but they come up for families. And what do you do when your milk comes in, when your baby has passed away? And so I tried to address all these things in a very personal way, just to offer support to others, because I found that a lot of the books on grief didn't answer what I needed to know at the time of my pregnancy. It's a very lonely path, right? We're alone, and then when it's done, it's kind of done, and you're not really allowed to talk about your baby, and you're certainly not supposed to talk about your miscarriages, and you're just supposed to carry on, and time heals all wounds, people tell you. And I find that this really isn't true. I don't think grief ever heals. It changes with time. But when it's a baby and you don't know what the baby liked, and there's so many unknowns, it's a very different type of grief. And it's a very different pregnancy when you know that your baby will die, and a different situation than having a healthy, exciting, normal pregnancy and then having a stillborn. That's very complex. All these different things are very complex. I teach a class on my book. The next one will be in March. It's on my website, which we'll post somewhere. My class that I do, it's in 3 different parts, and we talk a lot about holding this space for people going through infant and pregnancy loss, and what that means, and how we can support each other in the moment. And certainly part of that is not saying things that are platitudes, but having a quiet kindness to us, where we can just say things like, I'm here for you. I don't know what you're going through. And not necessarily asking lots of questions about what people need, because I think people don't know what they need when they're going through these things. And then I share my story there, and I share a few photos. The next part is creating a web of support for families, and how do we not lose these families, that they don't just drop off, from delivery because they're going home without their babies, or their baby is in the NICU. And how do people support them in their communities? There's quite a bit of support for new healthy babies and meal trains and all that. And then the last part is doing rituals and honoring the baby gone too soon. And how do we do that? How do we keep a baby as part of our family life, as part of our life? How do we remember them in the holidays when very often people just don't want to think about these babies or talk about them? Karen, if you don't mind my putting you on the spot, I was wondering if you would share what brought you here before I go ahead and share part of the book.
So I'm a recent graduate of Conscious Dying Institute End of Life Doula program. So I just am very interested in how I can help as an end of life doula for those that, are suffering this kind of loss and grief.
And Karen, I bet, and I bet Cindy, this is true. I know my grandmother talked about her miscarriages until she died, until she got dementia very badly. It's something women remember, and they carry it with them. And so as you're working with folks who are older, I wouldn't be surprised if this came up. And there's some trauma to be healed. For example, births in the 50s, stillborn babies were taken away. Nobody was allowed to look at them. There's some information that perhaps there were mass graves at some of the Catholic hospitals. I mean, no closure, no way to hold it for the families. So some of these people have never saw their babies. And there's one of those babies in my book, and I have a memorial page, and the mom never saw her baby. And it happened decades ago, and she still remembers and talks about it, And so I think it's a big part of women's stories. Every pregnancy, every baby leaves DNA behind in our bodies to build our immunity. And we don't forget. And so when somebody has many losses, some women have only losses, right? Are they not mothers? Are we not, are those not their children? And there's this lovely woman up in Canada, Tracy Swainson, works with families with multiple losses. And she interviewed me on my book. It's on YouTube, and it's, I'll put that in the chat. It's Tracy Swainson, Swainson. And she does lovely work around healing and just supporting families, because it doesn't feel like there's a space for us, right? It doesn't feel like there's a space for us. So let me put her name in the chat. People can find her on social media. And what I had today on my heart was this idea that instead of looking at these losses as bad, that's such a terrible thing that's happened to you. What if we shifted our view and found some kind of purpose and meaning and way to honor these babies, and some way that we can transform these experiences instead of something so negative into something of acceptance, of love, of honoring, of nurturing, just like all the work you end of life doulas do, which is such beautiful work. So imagine for the woman giving birth, right? Her baby doesn't make it. Her body didn't create the outcomes our society expects, right? So there's that to deal with. There's the hormones, right? Where's the baby? It's not the crying baby that wakes you up at night, it's the hormones. So there's that. There's so many different pieces. And I wonder, like in my mind, I just want to see this beautiful way of supporting each other, the way women can do. And fathers need support as well, although I think they're, at least my husband, less verbal. My husband doesn't talk about it as much. But I would love to see us have communities where we can talk about all of our children and talk about all of our babies and count them and say their names and honor them. So I was very lucky to have found Isaiah's Promise when I was pregnant. Cubby was my mentor. And she wrote me emails and sent presents for this baby that nobody else would dare send presents for, right? Because she was going to die. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And so They sent me this handmade blanket with Mary Rose's name stitched on it, and they sent me a little, christening gown, and there were some other things, just very sweet. And after she died, they sent me a Christmas stocking, which we still hang up with a little angel on it. Some booties I use as a Christmas ornament. And she was loving this baby, even though the baby was going to die. And most people don't do that. So I wanted to read a little bit of what Cubby wrote. Here's what she says. It would be good to get you turned around about the life of your daughter now while she is here. You'll be okay with some support around you. And who says that, right? You're going to be okay. And that's why I do this work. I want people to know that they're going to survive this. They're going to make it through, and they're going to still love the baby. Just like Valerie Coher says in Revolutionary Love, grief is the price we pay for love. And it's okay. And I want some space for grieving on our planet with everything else. Cubby wrote, do not be afraid of her or of the birth, because I think we are taught to be afraid of these babies. The way the neonatologist spoke of Mary Rose, he said, she's going to look like an elf. Her ears will be misshapen, and that might be cute to you. I mean, who says that in a consult, right? But I think there's so much on the internet. If you Google some of these things, birth defects and all of this, there is a fear. What are we birthing? What are we going to hold? And this was so comforting to me. Try to embrace the fact that she has worked hard all this time to stay with you. Most babies with issues are miscarried. So Mary Rose is a gift, even if she passes. Our babies, let's see, are not throwaway babies. They are just maybe too broken for this world, And I think there is an assumption, and I am pro-choice, but there was an assumption that I would have an abortion because I'm pro-choice politically. This was very hard for people to accept, that I was carrying this baby to term. So again, just like everyone's welcome at the table. It doesn't matter what choice you make, but let's be there for each other. Let's see. You must not feel guilty. You have carried her because you love her. In life, we all suffer in some way. Even a healthy child suffers along the way. It is just that Mary Rose will have all the joy, love, and suffering in a short period of life. With all the babies I have helped deliver, I have not seen suffering. It has always been very, very peaceful, like falling asleep. Even with Francis, that was Cubby's baby who died. It was slow and peaceful, and I was not afraid. We held him always. You won't need any equipment because you will not be putting her down. All of the parents that we have worked with have made their own decision about carrying to term, and none have regretted it. People as society are very uncomfortable, but surround yourself with people who understand and care about you, your family, and Mary Rose. Mary Rose deserves dignity. She will always live in your heart. She will give you strength. You are stronger than you think. Right now, it is all the unknowns that make life so tedious. After birth, things will fall into place. Even though you sense that Mary Rose's time will be short, you must begin to look forward to meeting her, whatever the outcome. Love and letting go will be a part of it, but nothing is more important than love. In the meantime, we will keep praying for you, especially for strength. And remember, look forward to meeting her. God has given you a great gift. And that's the part that is so important, that all of our babies are gifts. It doesn't matter the outcomes. It shouldn't matter. We should just accept them as they are. And Cindy, we had our Colorado End of Life Collaborative at a cemetery. Was that last week? It feels like so long ago. It was at Seven Stones Cemetery in Littleton. And there were stones there for babies and young children, and it was such a peaceful, beautiful place. And I think about that what would it take for us as a society to turn this around and support each other and accept things as they come? Because babies have always died. There's nothing new. We think we'll take our vitamin and, have this 100%, not just, but healthy and gorgeous and smart. Like we want everything, right? We want all our kids to be perfect. And that's not life, We have so much diversity in our humanity. And one thing, it's unnatural to bury a child. I know many people who have buried children. Who said that? Who made that up? So I wanted to open this up to questions. I don't know, Cindy, if I can possibly change my security things because of the recording. I don't know, but I can give it a try.
I don't know if you can either.
But I will give it a try.
But I would definitely think that the three of us could have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I am ready for a conversation. And Karen, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask anything.
So I didn't capture in the intro at the beginning, are you, Dianna, offering support groups or
yeah, I have some classes online
classes?
and I have the book.
Yes.
I
wrote down the book.
And I'm on social media. I have some grief things. I'm on Instagram at Labyrinth of My Heart.
Okay.
So I think it's such a private thing. And I think that there are support groups for parents, and so I think that is there if somebody wants it. But I think this is so hard and so private and so lonely in many ways. I do have a class coming up in November on how to honor our loved ones who have passed away. And then I do the book, and I have I'm offering a Mother's Day class as well. And Linda Cheldilin-Fell had interviewed me a couple of years ago on Mother's Day when your child has died, and it was viewed over 2,000 times on Facebook. It's such an important topic because what do we do on those days, right? And that's why I always say we are mothers to all of our children. It doesn't matter the outcomes. So that's the work I do and that I offer for folks. And I do consulting as well. I've supported many moms going through this.
And you do your poetry therapy as well.
Yeah. Well, I launched so much before COVID hit, but it's all there. When it's the right time, it'll happen. And I also, in the book, there are some exercises for people to work things out themselves, to write in journals, to do some art. And I mention a book specifically on birth that Shiloh, Sophia, and Mary Burgess did, which is a workbook with artwork. That's how I got the cover of my book. What is it called? Let me find it. It's called Mending Invisible Wings, Healing from the Loss of Your Baby. It's a beautiful book, and it's very specific. And Burgess is a doula, and her first doula birth was a stillborn. And so she felt she needed to do this to deal with her own self, right? As a witness to the birth, but also to support the families. And it's really lovely.
Dianna, what do you think? Are hospitals helping, because they're the ones who, and OBGYNs? I
think in some places we are seeing differences, and we're seeing a separate section of maternal fetal medicine, like a quieter place, because it was that you would birth these babies with everyone else, with their parties and their balloons and, the healthy babies and the crying and all that. I think we're seeing a shift. I think there's some amazing nurses doing this work. I chose to birth at home because I didn't want any interventions, and I had no additional risk to myself. And I was right near a hospital if I needed it. So that's another thing that's very rare. A lot of people who plan a home birth, when they get a diagnosis like this, they automatically go to the hospital because they think they have no choices. And that's another part of the journey that's a little complicated, but it can be done. So I do think there is some shift, but when I went for the ultrasound, the nurse came in and said, "Oh my goodness, you're 42 and pregnant. How wonderful." She hadn't read the chart that the baby was dying. So I think we still have this idea of what the outcomes are. You're pregnant, people get excited, you're going to have a healthy baby. And 1 million babies die in our country before their first birthday every year. It's a lot of families who are grieving. You know, you have the newborn, the stillborns, the newborn deaths, SIDS. You know, of course there's some accidents in those as well, but it's a lot, and I don't see people talking about it or doing anything about it. I really
Yeah,
do.
1 million in the US.
Every year.
That's amazing. I mean, it's
Mhm.
not amazing in a good way. It's a sad statistic that, yeah, concerns me quite a bit actually about our infant
Yeah.
mortality here.
We do have a high infant mortality rate as well in this country. For a Western country, we do. But I think it's so surprising because we're not hearing about it, right? I mean, I think families are carrying these losses so closely and so tightly because, you know, they're afraid to talk about it at work. You know, you go on maternity leave and then you don't have a baby. I mean, it's really hard. It's a very hard, nuanced experience, but there's so many of us, and we really, I feel like we need to just be accepted as we are. It's not a competition how many kids you've had. People have said some crazy things to me. I was at a meeting at my son's school once, and this woman said, "Oh my goodness, Caroline, must be so easy for you. You have only one child." And I wept all the way home. I thought, wow, that's such a nasty thing to say. She has 4 kids because it's a competition, right? You know?
Yeah.
But you know, you never know. You never know when you're talking to someone how many losses, what people desired for their families, and what struggles they have, you know. And our children struggle too. You know, the children who've lost their siblings are also struggling, and some of them have trauma, and you know, we need to make space for them as well, for them to get the healing that they need to,
Mhm.
particularly if they're younger than 3 at the time of the loss. It can have a really long-term impact on them.
Well,
Yeah.
I can tell you from my experience, my sister died when I was a baby. My sister was 6. It had a tremendous impact on my brother, who was 2 years older than her. So he was 8. It's affected him his whole life. And then my mother died very soon after, like 5 years after that. So we had 2 major losses in a short period, relatively short period of time that, you know,
I'm
scarred
so
us in
sorry.
different ways. Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's a lot. And here you find yourself now supporting people in their death, right? And I
Yeah.
think I heard that a lot of midwives become end of life doulas as well, is that, you know,
Mhm.
witnessing the first breath and the last breath. There's some synchronicity to that.
Yeah.
You know.
It's a beautiful balance.
Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing. Oh my gosh. You know, and it's got me thinking about we need to get more education out into society. So, you know, it's
We
got my head
do.
going, yeah, about how I
Yeah.
can bring this into the conversation as
Yeah.
I, you know, try to engage people. And at you know, probably mostly it'll be at senior centers to start. But to your point, elderly women also may be carrying this great grief from their youth that needs to be expressed. So I'm already, you know, the wheels are spinning a little bit about how I can introduce this topic into a conversation about the whole breadth of end of life. It's not just the elderly that are dying, it's babies and children and teens and young adults, etc.
Mm-hmm. And I think we carry those memories, right? You never forget these losses, right? But again, I think because it's such a private loss, you know, I think if a teenager dies, I think it's more public, right? The high school will come out, the teachers will come out, the friends will come out. But these losses are so private, people don't even know, right? They bleed at home. Um, who do they tell, and who holds them? You know, and we need so much more. We need to do so much better as a society, but we, you know, we worship, right, beauty and health and perfection. We're such an ableist society as well. So when you're birthing a child with disabilities, with otherness, you know, being differently abled, it's a struggle. It's a struggle when they live and they need services. And I think what happens is sometimes, depending on where you live, you're pushed to carry to term, or you're pushed to have an abortion, depending on your state and depending on the perhaps political orientation of the group you're in. Then there's the whole thing about whether or not to use life support. That's another thing. It's a hot button issue. Some people think you have to use life support. We have this technology. We chose not to because, we felt if she couldn't breathe, that she was going to die anyway. We didn't want her to suffer. But I respect people for using intubating. I mean, it's just that there's so many choices we have to make. And then you have to think about the funeral, if you're going to have one, or a memorial, and what you're going to do with the body. And part of the work we do here at the Colorado End of Life Collaborative is to let people know what their rights are. And one of the reasons I didn't want to birth in the hospital was they told me they were going to put my baby in the morgue, and I just couldn't bear that thought. So I needed to find a way where I could keep her from me. And then she would go into the church. I'm Orthodox Christian, so we bring our bodies into the church and people read Psalms over the bodies overnight, and then they're buried. And so I couldn't imagine a newborn in a morgue. That was one of the hardest things for me. And I said, well, what about our Orthodox Jews and our Baha'is? I mean, some people prepare their bodies in their religion, and they couldn't tell me. They couldn't tell me at the hospital. It was just like this, there's one path, right? And so we have to know the rights in our state and know that we do have a right to prepare our bodies and to do our home funerals and to do what we want, what we need to do to heal and to honor these children. And we never forget. People will say, oh, we don't want to bring it up. Or, my coworker had a stillborn, but I don't want to mention it. I don't want to remind her. Don't worry, she's never going to forget, And there are some people who don't want to talk about it, but I think part of that work is to follow the cues. I think most people do want to talk about it. Most people want to hear you say their baby's name. They want to have just some acknowledgement of the pregnancy, of the experience, and of the birth, instead of just sweeping it under the rug and pretending like it never happened, which we're really good at doing in our country,
Well, and it almost feels like there's some kind of stigma element to it. Like, are women feeling shame or some kind of, which of course they should never feel. I mean, oh my gosh,
there's a guilt, I think. I think that's part of the journey, because your body's not doing what society is telling you your body should do, right? Yeah, I think it's something most of us go through at some point, and then a lot of women feel if they have one living child, they can't have a sibling for that child. They feel guilty about that, and they feel that they didn't give what their child needed. And, I think it takes a little courage to accept your family in whatever shape and form it's in, and it's a hard thing to do. We have this idea, right? The 2-child family, 1 boy, 1 girl, everyone's healthy and beautiful and smart. And it's just part of our culture.
Well, it's time for culture to shift a little, not just a little. Just around the whole end of life conversation. And this is just a huge hidden component of it, that, to your point. So, thank you for the work that you're doing to, put yourself out there. And, that's an exposure that most women, to your point, can't bear to do. And so this will bring great healing, I think, to many women, I'm sure already.
I hope so. I have heard, I get letters sometimes from the book, and it seems that it is helping people. It's very raw, and it's very in the moment. And I've had people say, it's like, exactly how I feel. I went through it. I do know how you feel. But I just really do want to see more acceptance, and I have to work, and I think with COVID too, we've had so many discussions about death and mortality, and yet I don't know if things are shifting. I don't know. Cindy, do you know if things are shifting a bit?
Well, I think it's easy for me to see a shift, because I'm immersed in the topic. And so, and I see all the changes happening, not just around end of life care and support, but also how we deal with body disposition after someone has died. There are more choices than ever, particularly in Colorado. We have more choices than ever. And so these shifts allow people to have these conversations a little more freely because there are choices to be made and conversations to be had. And if you've never discussed with your loved ones what you want for yourself, I encourage families to do dinners and have these conversations, or friends, get a group of friends together and just talk about what you want for yourself and just say it and verbalize it and have someone hear it for you. So I feel like there's a shift, but I'm also aware that I work in the business. So,
Right.
so
But that's
I'm
hopeful.
immersed all the time. Yeah.
Because hopefully it will trickle down to other parts of the, of the hospital system, of our healthcare system. Hopefully it will shift.
And I'm very careful, even like on my social media, which is full of my friends and family and also colleagues, but I'm very careful to use terminology that I want people to use. So I do say dead, and I do say death, and I do say dying, and I don't phrase it any other way. I'm very open about the language that I use. And I will tell clients that too, that I'm very open about the language that I use, and I want to make it a comfortable space. And, it's interesting when you get a situation where you go in to meet a client, let's say an elderly woman, and her adult children are her caregivers, and and you're sitting bedside with her having a conversation, and she says, don't tell my children that I'm dying, they don't know. And then you have a conversation with the children, they say, okay, well, don't say to mom that she's dying because she doesn't know. And I'm like, can we all come together in the room, and let's open this up and have a conversation about it, because there's a huge break in communication here. And there's no reason that we shouldn't talk about mom dying, and that mom shouldn't be able to talk about dying. I know with my own father, my father died in 2001, and I wasn't a doula back in 2001, but I was a hospice volunteer. I'd been a hospice volunteer at that point for almost 10 years. And my father knew that. And his wife, my stepmother, was a nurse. And she was nursing him through the final months of his life. And my father called me up one day and he said, I want to say something to you that I believe you can hear me say. And I said, what is that? And he said, I'm ready to go.
Oh, how beautiful.
And I said, have you not been able to say that, to your wife? And he said, when I say it to her, she downplays it. Oh, don't talk like that. Let's not talk about it. But he wanted to talk about it. He wanted to talk about the acceptance of his own death. And so he needed to find a place where he could safely do that for someone who could hear it. And it happened to be his daughter. And this is my father, but I could hear it. It was okay for me to have him express his readiness, that he felt like he was suffering and he didn't want to suffer anymore. And so, I talk to families about that. Let's make it possible for your loved one to express themselves, no matter what it is they need to say. And I think that's true, in the death of a baby or a child as well, is to just make that space, to make it okay to talk about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, don't you pray? Don't you believe in miracles? Or, the spoke, the new age too, or the spoke, you're having negative thoughts. We have testing that's 99.8% accurate, our blood work. And that's why I love Sharon Salzberg so much when she talks about meditation, because she says we all suffer. We're running away from suffering in our country. We just don't want to talk about it. We think if we're good or if we meditate, and we do this to women with breast cancer. We blame them, right? We tell them to meditate. Which is all fine and good, but people get sick and they die. And it's not a loss of a battle.
Mm-mm.
It's a natural occurring part of life. And how beautiful that you could be there for your father to hear that, to hear that and to hold space for him and to listen to him. So I would say it's much worse, there's even more of that, right? when you're pregnant and there's a baby involved. And, and then the thing with abortion to me is it's almost like, you should just do that and kind of put it behind you, right? Instead of giving the family the time and the choice to really make the decisions that are right for them, because different families choose different things and there isn't a right or wrong for those families, right? I myself, I wanted to carry my baby to term. I'm pro-life personally, but I don't believe that my views should be, governed into law, right? But it was hard for people on both sides to see, We had people in church telling us to get an abortion, and we had the pro-choicers all just made this assumption that abortion would be the easiest thing. I even had someone say after, you wouldn't have been so sad if you had had the abortion after she was born. And how do we,
Well, and to not honor that, regardless, the termination of a pregnancy is a loss.
it is a loss.
Regardless of the reason, it's a loss, and
It
there's a
is.
grief that goes with that. So to not even honor that, it's much more complicated than we as a society allow the conversation to be.
And there is no Band-Aid for any of these circumstances. We've
No.
got to walk through it. We've got to hold it. We have to.
And there's no right way for everyone. That's
Right.
and I think if anything, the piece about all of this work for me is to give people their choices and let them choose what is right for them, what is right for their family.
Mm-hmm.
And not to judge that, and not to expect that what is right for you should be the same thing for everyone else.
Right. And then the other part of this is that they say, well, you'll have another, and I didn't. And so again, just kind of this rushing, okay, let's be done with this. And then let's just go on and have another baby. Another baby doesn't heal the loss of a baby.
No.
And my midwife had told us a story about a woman who had one loss. I don't remember if it was a stillborn or a different situation. And she quickly had two babies. And then in the middle of that, raising those two babies, she crashed because she had never grieved her baby. And you can have 4 more babies. It's not going to take away the space that one baby took where it was, which is in our bodies, right?
Absolutely.
Most people didn't see our babies. They're in our bodies. And so it's really a very complex grief. And I think when you're talking to parents who've lost children, when you're pregnant and it's very complex. It's a very complex grief, and it's like a double grief, and one doesn't hurt more than another, or one isn't more, profound than another.
Again, not a competition.
No,
Not a competition.
but it is certainly, it is a unique experience.
So I personally do not have experience with pregnancy or infant loss myself. For my children, that I had 2 pregnancies. I have 2 daughters. But my daughter went through a situation with my one and only grandchild that is not here. I don't expect I will probably have grandchildren at this point. So let's move to the next generation, right? So I lost my one grandchild and never got to meet her. And she was named, her name was Chloe, and I grieve that, and my daughter and I honor her every year on the day that she was lost, and remember her. And so, you know, that's a loss for me. But, you know, people who are my age will say, oh, you don't have any grandchildren. And I immediately think of Chloe, right? I immediately go to Chloe.
Right?
I do have a grandchild,
Mhm.
but I don't get to watch her grow up. I don't get to see those milestones. And, but she's still here, you know, in my heart and in my daughter's heart, you know. So,
And this work that we do is about remembering, honoring. I mean, people who say there's going to be closure and then you move on.
mm-mm,
Don't read my book if you believe that. I mean, I just don't believe that for a second.
no.
You know, it changes, it shifts. I have a garden for my daughter. Her birthday is never easy for me. And I
Mhm.
don't think it gets easier by any means, you
Mm-mm.
know, as the time goes by. And it's been 7 years now, you know, and then we carry it, and they are our children and we love them. And I think they communicate to us through nature and through other people. And, you know, so I feel very much that the relationship continues and that the soul continues. I just couldn't live, I think, if I thought differently, you know, and I feel her here. And then we work toward finding our joy in our grief, you know, and finding great joy in the rose that just bloomed even after we had a frost, you know, or the raven's feather I just found, you know. I mean, and carrying the two together, it's not a one or the other, right? We're not
No.
happy or we're grieving, but doing the work,
You
to
can hold them both
both,
simultaneously.
to hold them both and to find the joy, which really takes a training, right? And mindfulness, and that takes time to do. But regardless of the situation, I think we can find something beautiful. I mean, when I was pregnant, they gave me a blessing way. It was my midwife, my doula. I had a birth photographer. I had, they brought somebody to do henna on my belly. And there were a couple of other people there, and they honored me, and they honored Mary Rose, and that still means so much to look at those pictures and to see that sisterhood, which is what I want, you know, virtually, in person. I want so much for women to stop competing, to stop striving for some kind of perfection with their children, and to really embrace each other in all the different phases of motherhood, because miscarriage and infant loss, that still is motherhood. And even if you don't want to talk about it, you know, it's just still part of us and part of our stories. And, you know, I can dream of that world where we can all support each other and speak the names of our children and honor them.
Well, and I think this work that you're doing and just sharing what you're sharing today helps in that regard. And maybe for those who feel that they need permission or encouragement or whatever, to be open and say their name.
That's all we want. What do we have, you know? And for somebody to acknowledge that I have a daughter, you know, it's hard for people because they're so literal, right? You know?
Yeah.
No, I've had people tell me you don't have a daughter. I'm like, oh, I do. You just can't see her. You know, I sure do.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, this is important work. And it's work that can really heal the soul, so that when this generation of moms get to the end of their life and they're on their deathbed, hopefully they can talk about all their children with equal regard and equal love, and be accepted as doing that.
I met one of my clients. She was one of my hospice patients. And on our very first meeting, within like the first 45 minutes of conversation, she told me, that she had a daughter who died at birth.
Mhm.
And she told me her name. Her name was Patricia. She
Mhm.
told me I remember this,
Sure.
I don't forget that she shared that with me. And she had Parkinson's dementia, but she wanted to tell me that she had a daughter that died at birth.
How
She
beautiful.
wanted me to know this about her,
Mhm.
that
It's
she had.
stitched into our bodies,
Mhm.
and it's stitched into our souls. And so how wonderful that you could hear her and not change the subject or run away from it, but that you can hold Patricia.
An honor that she shared that with me.
Yeah.
And I still remember Patricia's name even now. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite, and she had 2 other living daughters, but she didn't want to talk about the living daughter. She wanted me to know.
Right.
And that was quite beautiful.
And who knows how many people she wanted to talk to about this with and couldn't.
Yeah.
Her whole life, how many times she may have wanted to mention her daughter, but she couldn't.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, and it's such simple work. It's giving people space, it's giving people time, it's sitting with a cup of tea and and just listening, just sharing and not saying much, right? I don't think you had too much to say at that moment, right, Cindy?
I just said, I thanked her for sharing that with me. And,
Mhm.
I told her that I was sorry for her loss. And, but that, I felt that she was honoring her by introducing her to me in that
Mhm.
way, and I have never forgotten it.
No. How could you? It's beautiful.
Cindy, I'm sure the way you received that was such a gift for her to help her have some peace, in that transition time for herself. So you helped create a bridge of peace for her in holding that space of her love for her daughter who wasn't there.
Thank you. Yes, that's what I hope that I did for her.
Definitely.
Yeah. My house is going to get noisy because my husband's home and my dog is happy.
That's quite all right.
So, is there anything else that we wanted to get accomplished in our conversation today, Dianna?
I'm feeling pretty good about things. Unless Karen has any more questions. And
No, just thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and your gifts.
thank you for being here, Karen. I appreciate you.
Yes, Karen, thank you for joining us today and participating in this very important work. And Dianna, as always, I learned so much from you, and I'm so grateful for your offerings to the community in this regard. And so, I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful.
And if anybody has questions for me, they can find me on Facebook and Instagram or right through my website.
Or
Well,
through our
I'm gonna-
collaborative website as well.
Yeah, I will answer questions if people have any.
I'm going to go follow you now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And happy
All right, you
fall.
guys
Yeah.
take care.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.
Take care. Bye.